Hi, Confirmation families. This week we're going to trace how Passover, this ancient Israel ceremony, comes into Jesus' time and then to us today. So last week we talked all about Moses and the Egyptians and how God sent the Spirit of God into Egypt and it passed over the people of Israel because they had the blood of the lamb on their doorposts. And so the Spirit of God knew to pass over them, and only that plague affected the Egyptians. And so this is something that was so monumentous for Israel at the time that every year they would celebrate that event with a meal. And how they would do that is they would kind of recreate the meal that the Israelites ate at Passover. Then every year they would celebrate these things. It was one of their major holidays. So when Jesus, at the Last Supper, when he institutes communion, him and his disciples are celebrating Passover. And so when you see the image of like the Last Supper by Da Vinci, and they're all kind of sitting on one side of the table, like you do, I guess, in Israel times, they're celebrating the same thing that Moses and the Israelites in slavery were experiencing. And that's a pretty cool thing. Now that shifted over time, and here's like an image of a traditional Passover or Seder meal, and there's a lot of different things that have been added over time. They got a hard-boiled egg, you have like a bone, you've got some bitter herbs and some bitter vegetables and some salt water. It's actually a lot of bitterness in this meal. It's probably not a meal you would really want to eat, but it has a lot of ceremonial value and is a powerful meal because of how it symbolizes how Israel was freed from slavery. And so when the disciples see Jesus take this meal and transform it into a new covenant, they understand the symbolism and the importance of these elements. So Jesus would take the bread, and this would probably be the bread that they would use back then because it's an unleavened or a flat bread. And when he would break that and say, "This is my body given for you," they could trace that all the way back to Passover and be like, yeah, I remember bread being a part of that original Passover. And then Jesus would take the cup and bless it and say, "This is my blood shed for you." They can trace that wine all the way back to Passover and say, yeah, that was present there. But for them, as Israelite men and women, and for us, if you know the story of Passover, you're like, well, there's something missing on our side of the table over here that Jesus used that was at the original Passover. Some would say the most important part of Passover, which was the lamb. Little Fluffy here, our lamb. Because this is the lamb that would have been shed and his blood placed on the door frames that would notify that God would spare the people of Israel. So when Jesus takes this meal to transform it into communion, and he does not include lamb. We don't eat lamb on Sunday mornings at communion. He does not include that. It's a symbolic understanding that the disciples pick up on probably right away. And for us, we have to have that connection to the Old Testament to recognize when Jesus does not include the lamb in the new covenant, it's because Jesus becomes that lamb present. The same way the lamb was slain to save Israel, Jesus is the new lamb slain to save us. And so we have the bread and we have the wine every Sunday morning, and in that we get the lamb. This is what Jesus takes the place of for us. And so we get a mini Passover every time we take communion. Every time you sit in church and we take communion together, we're celebrating all the way back to God freeing Egypt from slavery up till now, where God is freeing us from the sins and slavery that we are slaves to sin. It's pretty awesome to think about that Jesus is taking this ancient thing, taking it to his context, and we get it still today and into the future. So that's how Passover connects to Jesus' Last Supper, and that connects to communion for us today. Bye, everybody.